Are you thinking about starting or nourishing a career in menstrual cycle health? Then consider joining our 9-month online holistic hormone and cycle coaching certification training. In this training, you get science-backed and evidence-based education, as well as teachings about the somatic aspects of having a menstrual cycle, functional nutrition, hormone testing, and much, much more. We will have incredible live group sessions, and you will get guidance from me. There will also be amazing guest teaching lectures from experts in the field, and at the end, you will receive an official certificate of completion that is globally recognized. As a listener of the Planting Seeds podcast, you receive an additional €100 off when you use the code PODCAST when you sign up. Click on the link in the show notes to learn more.
Hello, friends. My name is Iris Josephina. I'm your host, and you are listening to the Planting Seeds podcast. On the Planting Seeds podcast, we explore how we can cultivate a more gentle relationship with our cyclical bodies, the earth, each other, and the world around us through using our senses, science, the subtle, and the sacred. On Planting Seeds, we talk about all those topics you've always wanted to talk about. We are shamelessly opening up the conversations that we all so desperately need to settle in our precious bodies and relate to each other in a more open, truthful, and empowered way. I'm so glad you're here today.
So today is a little bit more of a personal episode, and people have been requesting this episode, and I think I'm finally ready to share about it. It still feels a little bit scary, but I think it's important I do share about it because I feel this can help a lot of people. So this episode is about, as you read, about my ADHD diagnosis. And I received this diagnosis one day before my birthday this year. So one day before my 33rd birthday, I had an official ADHD diagnosis. And I've been on the waiting list for over 8 months before they would even see me. And the diagnosis really feels like a liberation. So people have asked me like, oh, how does it feel, to get like a label? Doesn't it feel weird to have this label? And honestly, it doesn't. So many things finally make sense in my life after 33 years of being in complete limbo and not understanding why I do certain things in the way that I do, why I struggle with sometimes keeping friendships up and running and alive, why I am overwhelmed by certain things, how I perform tasks, how I do my work. So much has been clarified by this diagnosis. And what is actually even more profound is that for the first time in my life, I feel supported with who I am, how my brain works. And for the people who are listening who don't know what ADHD is, I prefer to kind of like stick to the definition or the explanation that a doctor I admire, Gabor Mate, uses. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Most people now also call it ADD. The terms can be used interchangeably. And he says, rather than an inherited disease, attention deficit disorder is a reversible impairment and developmental delay with origins in infancy. It's rooted in multi-generational family stress and in disturbed social conditions in a stressed society. So I was really relieved as well that both this doctor and also my therapist don't see ADHD as a disease, but rather an impairment, specifically on the neofrontal cortex, and specifically a developmental delay, which means that by creating the right environment, the person with ADHD can actually improve their symptoms and actually feel better. I wouldn't say like there is a cure for it, because literally my mind is wired differently. So a lot of people speak about neurotypical brains and neurodivergent brains. An ADHD brain would be categorized under neurodivergent brain. And for me, knowing all of this, learning all of this, and many of you know me, when I am interested in something, when I can dive into a topic, I will dive into it, which is, by the way, an ADHD trait I learned later. And I want to know everything about it. And what I learned is that when I started learning about how my brain works, I actually understand myself better. I understand my reactions and responses better. I understand my behavior better. I understand my body sensations, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions better. And it's truly such a gift. Being diagnosed was the biggest gift of my life, like hands down, because so many things make sense now. And I'm just going to share a little bit about my history, because if there are people out there who are undiagnosed with ADHD, this may be an invitation for you to explore further. Because being undiagnosed with ADHD and having to struggle and you don't know why is terrible. And I feel you. I've been there for 33 years. It's terrible. It's not fun. It's really not fun. So I'm going to describe a couple of things that happened to me when I was younger. And by no means I want to say that you have to have all these things to potentially be diagnosed with ADHD, but maybe they are recognition points. And I just want to invite you, like, if you have a curiosity, if you have a sensation, if you have an intuition that you may have ADHD, go explore it. Go explore it with a professional. Make sure that you receive the support. And maybe it's not ADHD, maybe it's something else. But either way, get your support. You deserve support. I deserved support, and I didn't receive it for so long. So let me just go over a few things that were really, profound in my journey, and really were like highlights in my life story that made my therapist, really consider that I may have ADHD, and made her do all the tests that they did. So the first thing is that I was born premature, and I was in an incubator for quite a long time after birth. And I did not have proper skin-to-skin bonding straight after birth. And I also didn't have the skin-to-skin opportunity during breastfeeding, because I wasn't breastfed. And as a child, I developed physically very slowly. So I was a very late walker. I didn't even crawl. I kind of like slid forward on my ass. I was quick with talking. I was quick with words. I was also very, very sensitive for texture sensations. So it was very hard for me to, for example, sit on the grass and feel the grass. It was very hard for me to explore difficult textures in my mouth when it came to food. Like, everything needed to be extremely well pureed, otherwise I wouldn't eat it. I was extremely introverted and shy. I didn't really connect with children easily. I was very much in my shell. If I had to describe the way that I looked in new social situations, it's really like a deer in the headlights, with very bright, big blue eyes looking around in a room, and literally my brain going haywire. I actually remember some of these experiences from when I was very young. I think I have my first memories from when I was like 3 or 4 years old, very young. And it was two events. One was a carnival event at school that completely overwhelmed me. And another one was a Santa Claus event in a public cultural center in my village where I was totally overwhelmed and I didn't know what was happening. And all I wanted was to be in a space where there was quiet. So I was pretty much all the time overwhelmed with sounds, a lot of people, a lot of things happening around me. And what happened for me is that I internalized my hyperactivity and I transported it into my brain. So this would mean that people would say, like, oh, she's such a quiet, sweet, dreamy kid. But in my brain, shit was going down. I was questioning everything. I was feeling so much. So the sensations in my body would overwhelm me so much that I would just go into freeze mode, like almost all of the time. And when I had to do something that was an order by somebody else, it always felt very difficult. I really wanted to find out my own way, and I was constantly corrected. Oh no, you have to do it this way. Oh no, you have to do it that way. And this kind of like continued from kindergarten all the way towards the end of high school, I would say. In primary school, one of the things that was a very profound shift was when I was 10 or 11 years old and we had a new teacher and we started doing these exercises in math. And there are these, I actually don't know what they're called in English, but they are these math exercises with a little story. So for example, Anne has a basket full of apples. She has 12 in the basket. Someone takes this amount out. How many apples does she have? I could not do this. It was so hard for me because my brain started to make stories way bigger than the story that was given that was needed as a support for the math exercise. What I basically had to do was just go like, oh, Anne has X amount of apples in her basket. Somebody takes 5 away and then tell my teacher how many apples were still left. My brain would wander off and go like, oh, where would these apples go? Maybe somebody just took them somewhere, but then didn't eat them and then returned them to Anne, you know? And then she still has all of her 12 apples. We don't know that. So my brain would always go way beyond, way further. And I was also the typical child that always asked, why? Why do we do this? Why is it this way? Why isn't it another way? This is also why mathematics was so extremely hard for me, because in math, it just is how it is. No questions asked. So I extremely struggled with mathematics. And this kind of like continued my entire life. I had to do my statistics exam, which is the same thing that I couldn't do in primary school, where they also ask these type of questions. And then you have to do like this mathematic thing. I had to redo my statistics for 5 times in uni. And if I had effed it up one more time, I had to quit uni. It was that bad. So these are some of the things that came up for me. Two things that I learned about that I have definitely done my entire life is masking. So masking is really trying so hard to be normal and having the fear that people will notice that something is different about you. Because when you have ADHD, you know something is different. You sense it. Because all the other kids do something a certain way and you really feel you want to do it the other way, but everybody does it this way. So you kind of like adapt, even though that way feels more difficult and more unnatural for you. You still do it because you don't want people to perceive you as weird. So that's a feeling I've had my entire life, as long as I can remember. Another thing that I really have struggled with is rejection sensitivity. I have had rejection sensitivity as long as I can remember. What this means is that rejection, or the perception of rejection, gives a very big emotional response out of proportion. But that feeling is internalized for me. So I would never speak out loud. I would never say like, oh, I feel rejected. But I would internalize the feeling and have like exploding emotions that wouldn't necessarily be clear about, what I was actually feeling. Or I would completely shut down and dissociate. And I literally know that feeling. I know when it happens. So the dissociation part is I just feel myself flying out of my body. But what it does is it brings me to a safer place, or a supposedly safer place, so I don't have to deal with the big emotion that I'm feeling. This is also a standard thing I've experienced my entire life, and it feels really huge. And sometimes it still happens, but right now I have really learned how to navigate it, but also how to recognize it. Another thing that I experienced as a kid is so many emotions and no outlet. So I would hold so many emotions in my body that I know now. My entire stress system, my HPA axis, my adrenal axis, would go in gigantic overdrive, which would give me, I know now, a panic attack where I literally would think that I was dying. There have been moments in my life where I literally told my mom, my grandma, I'm dying. And what was actually happening was that I just felt so unsafe. I felt so unsafe in my body. I had no idea how to return to safety. And one of the things that would help me was my grandmother holding my little wrist so that I could feel my heart beat against her fingers, and that would calm me down. So that's another thing. So these are very specific examples. I'm not expecting that people have like exactly the same experiences. But one of the more general things about ADHD that a lot of people are struggling with is the feeling of a lack of motivation, like not being able to start a task and not being able to, once you finish a project, like once you start a project, finish it with the same enthusiasm and energy. And this is like story of my life. I will have 1 bazillion ideas. Doesn't mean that I will do them all and work them all out because it's just too much. But a way in which this would manifest itself is at school, teachers telling me like, oh, there is like so much in her, but it's not like coming out. It's not like expressed. But it's also because I sometimes just didn't know how to start a task because, I would be paralyzed before starting a task and I would know so well that I had to start a task, but there was no way in my body that I could. And I later learned this is dopamine dysregulation, which happens in people with ADHD. And I still have it. It still happens that I have one thing planned for the day, let's say at 4 p.m., and the entire day just goes by. I have no idea what I'm doing. Most of the times then I'm just letting myself flow and do some things, but it won't feel successful or won't feel like I've succeeded. And sometimes I'll do very random things or sometimes even nothing until the task at 4 p.m. And I felt so ashamed about this for so long, especially, with running my own business. I have a very strong perception or sense of, oh, what will people think of me? Subconsciously, I don't actively think that, but it's like in my body. And so, speaking about this, even now, I can feel in my body like the shame coming up. Like I'm actually saying that I struggle a lot with starting tasks very often. And it's very stressful because then all the tasks pile up and then I don't have the overview and it gets really overwhelming. This is like basically the story of anyone with ADHD. that you know you're talented, you know you have the brain, you know you're smart, but you just cannot get yourself organized. And that's the story of my life. And, I try so hard to, always to get myself organized, but it's an insane amount of work to keep myself organized. That's why I have like all these systems in my business working for me, like my calendar, the overview, automatic client bookings, automatic payments, because otherwise I literally go cuckoo. I can't handle it. So yeah, speaking about this is on one hand relieving. On the other hand, I'm thinking like, oh my God, like I'm giving people access to really how life is for me. But I know I need to share about it because I know there are many people like me. I know there are many people who are undiagnosed, and it sucks. It sucks when you constantly in the undercurrent of life feel like, shit, something is wrong with me. I'm different than other people. What the hell is going on with me? Why can't I do this? Like, all these questions are questions that have been in my head my entire life until I got my diagnosis. And now I'm like, oh, that's why. And, having a therapist who understands all of this and who helps me understand how my brain works and how I can actually support myself, because the neurotypical society out there is totally unhelpful. Literally, the way the whole world is structured does not compute in my brain. I would organize the world in a very different way. And this is also one of the reasons why I started my own business, because there I have the freedom to organize in a way that I want, in a flow that I want, and not in an expected flow that is proposed by somebody else or by somebody who is neurotypical, because that just doesn't work. I noticed that in many, many of my jobs that I had, I would always see room for improvement, or see systems that my company was doing, or ways in which my companies were doing things in a certain way. I would be like, oh my God, this is such a waste of time to do it in this way. Maybe we can do it that way. And then people wouldn't like really be on board with my way of doing things, obviously, because they didn't have a neurodivergent brain. But it was just very frustrating. And of course, being an entrepreneur also comes with frustration, but way less, because I'm the leader of my business, and it's incredible. The sense of freedom that I feel, but also the sense of accomplishment and the sense of, really working in my own flow and according to my own brain, and not having to conform to a certain way of using my brain, which I've done my entire life, which is also part of the masking that I was speaking about earlier. But yeah, diagnosis is liberation for me. And, what I'm doing right now is I'm having a hypnotherapist to help me navigate my subconscious mind. And I have a general therapist who is specialized in ADHD. I know people are going to ask, like, oh, who is your therapist? I literally went through the official GGZ system in the Netherlands, and I was just extremely lucky to be assigned this therapist. So it's not somebody that you can just book. I was on a waiting list for 8 months, and I got assigned this person after those 8 months, and I've just been lucky. So I'm sorry I don't have like a name and an email address I can offer to you. I can share my hypnotherapist with you. I'll do that in the show notes. But yeah, my diagnosis has been such liberation. And the things that I am now doing, just to give you a couple of tips, like if you have had your diagnosis, but you don't necessarily have therapy, there are a couple of things that I'm currently doing. So I am mapping out what situations, what environments trigger my symptoms. So I'm, mapping out where do I have the most symptoms, where I feel overwhelmed and like I can't function. What are those? Very detailed. And what are the environments where my symptoms are non-existent or barely exist? And with that, I am creating like my ideal environment. And it's really my goal to eventually move to that specific environment and make sure that for the most part of my life, I am in an environment where my symptoms are manageable and I feel like myself. So that's the biggest thing that I'm actually doing. And for me, nature is a great part of that, like being near the water, being near the green, being able to walk in places where there is literally no people. That's really my go-to. But this can be different for anybody with ADHD. So I would say, like, go figure out which environments trigger you and which environments regulate you. And then, there is also the topic of medication. I'm not there yet. I am exploring, I am reading about it, I'm researching about it. I'm curious. I have to say that because I've heard stories from people who have had experiences with medication that are definitely, wild. And I'm not there yet. So I'm exploring that with my therapist. I'm curious about it. I'm also scared about it because allopathic medicine always scares me because I had some really gnarly experiences with antibiotics. And ever since then, I feel very anxious about taking pills. So, I hope this helps. I'm really hoping that you can draw some inspiration and some encouragement from this podcast episode. And I really hope that if you're thinking that you have ADHD, that you will take the steps to receive the support. I also want to say that, don't go self-diagnose. Be curious, recognize yourself in certain ADHD traits. And if you really think and feel this is something I need to explore further, do it and do it the good way. Don't go self-diagnosing. It's so stressful. And some symptoms that belong to ADHD are also things that sometimes just happens, once or twice in people's lives or sporadically. That doesn't mean that you have ADHD. ADHD is something very specific. And it's not that, I developed ADHD all of a sudden at age 30. No, it's not like that. And I really want to make that clear. Like, there is a lot of misinformation out there. There is a lot of self-diagnosing out there and self-helping out there. I can't tell you how grateful I am that I have a therapist in the system, in the medical system, because she's specialized. She's an expert. She knows. She doesn't shove medication down my throat, but she's there. She knows. She provides me with tips and tricks and support and counseling. And you deserve that too. If you think you have ADHD, don't go and self-diagnose and find your way through self-helping yourself. If you really have ADHD, you deserve help, professional help. And I really want to encourage you to go get that. Get yourself on a waiting list, get tested, because everywhere they have waiting lists. I had to wait for 8 months. Get yourself on the list and do it proper, because I feel there's too much. I don't want to go into it too much, but I feel that there's too much crap out there. And another thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to close off, is when you are diagnosed. And I want to speak to people who have ADHD and people who have friends or family who have ADHD. So once you're diagnosed, see how you feel about sharing this with people. In the beginning, it can feel really scary. For me, it felt really scary. Do with that what feels good for you. And know that people will give shitty answers. People will say shitty things, even your friends. And that sucks. People may say things as like, oh yeah, I sometimes also have ADHD things or ADHD symptoms, while they are very neurotypical. Or people will say, oh, everybody has ADHD these days. It's just diagnosed more often. It's not that there are all of a sudden more people with ADHD. And there's actually proof that ADHD has existed in humanity for a very long time, also before social media. So don't believe people who go around and tell you like, oh, it's like social media creating ADHD. It's bullshit. It's not true. So I want to say also to the people who may have friends or family with ADHD, or, if someone ever comes to you to tell you that they have ADHD, don't be an asshole. Please. Don't say, oh, I also have a little bit of ADHD, or, oh, everybody has ADHD these days. Just don't say it. It really sucks. It really, really sucks. And if you think you have ADHD, go get tested and then we talk, because it's really not okay. And for you, if you have ADHD and you have someone respond to you that way, tell them that response is not okay, because it's very much not supporting, and you deserve support, whether it's from your therapist, whether it's from your family, whether it's from your friends. And if you feel that you cannot have support from these people, ask your therapist for groups of like-minded people, of people who are going through the same thing. Go follow accounts on Instagram from people who are diagnosed. One account that I really absolutely love is called ADHD Chatter. They also have a podcast. The dude is incredible. Yeah, get support. That's the most important thing I want to say to you. Get support. And make sure that you know you. Learn about you. Learn about your brain. Learn about how it works. And know that there are people out there who get you. I understand you. I understand how your brain works. I understand how overwhelming the world is. I understand how many hobbies you have. I didn't talk about this. Or how many interests you have and how you jump from one thing to another because you're just so open and you're so interested in so many things, and you get bored by so many things too. So please know there are people out there who get it, and I encourage you to go find those people that you vibe with, because that's what you deserve. You've lived probably your entire life feeling misunderstood, and I have. And I am so grateful that it even makes me emotional. I'm so grateful that there are people who understand me, and there are people who understand like, oh, but this is just how your brain works because of this and this and this. And then you probably do also that and that and that. It's just, it's such a liberation. I feel so liberated with my diagnosis, and I wish this for everybody who has ADHD. Thank you so much for listening, and do feel free to reach out after you've heard this episode.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, with your friends, with your family, post about it on social media, or leave a rating or a review on all the platforms. To catch all the latest news from me, you can follow at the Planting Seeds podcast on Instagram, or at Cycle Seeds on Instagram, or you can go to my website www.cycleseeds.com. Thank you again so much, and I'll see you next time.